in a room sitting at tables and chairs. Right. So, and I think there are actually lots of different activities you can do as well.
I think that's such an interesting point because my mind goes to, we're talking about meetings, but my mind does go to, is it a meeting to begin with? And I think that's when you said, could this be an email? And I think about how many things in an organization, big or small, or decisions that need to be made on a day-to-day basis. And some organizations have a culture of being very collaborative. And so then bringing people together becomes part of their decision-making process. And that's the culture of the organization. But really, I think when it comes down to deciding when do you have a meeting, again, we go back to what we started in this conversation. And again, the purpose. Is the purpose to inform? Is the purpose to work, as in to work through a problem, solution, something very specific? Is it a meeting where you're asking people to brainstorm? Is it a creative session where you are thinking about strategy, future proofing a business, whether or not you're starting to get your organization moving across on a path to growth or not? But again, it's the purpose of the meeting ends up driving things like who gets invited, right back to that starting sentiment. And then those allowances for time and listening and energy. And I think if there's a little bit more thoughtfulness at the front end of whether or not you actually schedule the meeting, I think then all these things that we're talking about become real conversations and real points of making sure that, again, the effectiveness of the time together becomes exactly what we're striving for.
Yeah.
Sorry, Martin, go
ahead. From what both of you have said, something has just come into my mind. The fact that you both have worked closely with each other, the fact that you know each other really well, but clearly from your responses, you're viewing meetings from quite different perspectives. So Claire, you're viewing them from an executive perspective, and Tamara, you're from a facilitative perspective. Could I ask both of you your experience of executives, of managers thinking about meetings in the way, Tamara, that you have articulated? Do executives think about meetings in that sort of flexible way? Or, Claire, from your experience, do managers more think about meetings in a unitary sort of way, without the flexibility of purpose, types of meetings, options for different structures, different processes? What's your respective experiences of that from the executive manager's point of view?
Tamara, do you want to go first?
Well, I'll tell a story. This was many years ago, and actually Claire knows this situation. So I was working with a team. We were going to do a collaborative workshop, and they had to have the proposal approved by someone in HR. And this person had no communication with any of us around this in advance. So all she was doing was looking at the proposal. And of course, as a facilitator, you have time built in at the front end to plan for what you're about to do. And she came back to me when we were talking, and she said, what's all this time you have at the front end? Aren't you good enough that you can just walk in the room and start doing it? And so that was, this was a while ago. Okay. So that organization has now since evolved to understand kind of the collaborative process and the facilitated process a lot more. But at that time it was, that was how things were seen. You just walk in the room and you start doing it. And so I think there are still, that's still out there in kind of the executive world, which is, they're not thinking about kind of structuring things or designing the meeting. Even the smallest meeting, you can have a framework for it. So for example, Claire, who is very experienced with collaborative meetings, brought up is, what is the purpose of this? And is it to inform? Is it to consult? Is it to involve? And that's there's a organization called IAP2, which I think probably Martin and Paul are familiar with, which is the International Association for Public Participation. And they have a spectrum of public participation, which says before you start engaging people, and it's not just meetings, it's all kinds of engagements. Before you start engaging people, ask yourself, are we just informing them? Are we consulting them, getting their feedback and opinion on something? Are we involving them, a little more active? Are we collaborating with them? So we're actually going to decide solutions together. Or are we empowering them to make a decision? Are they going to be the decision-making body? And first you start with where on the spectrum does this fit? And if it's informed, then maybe it can be an email, right? Or some other form of communication. If it's, collaborate and empower, then you probably need a really highly designed kind of process. If it's consult, do you just need focus groups? Like your choice of process or tool follows from that. So when you think what's happening in the minds of some executives, well, even now, still, I work with, or experienced senior people who are just like, well, can't you just walk in and start? Don't we just walk in and we just start talking? But a little bit more thought in advance, and you could have far more effective meetings. Even small management meetings with 5 people could be even better with a little structure, a little format.
I think one of the things that Tamara just touched on that I was going to start with was just around that thoughtfulness beforehand. And I keep going back to that purpose. And to answer your question, Martin, really, I feel as though meetings and their purpose has evolved over the course of not only my career, but I think has evolved over different perhaps phases in the market, and we'll talk about the pandemic and what that meant. But again, I do feel as though the awareness around being able to be collaborative and creating space around the table for diverse voices and diverse thinking is really at the forefront of our leaders' minds. And we're not always good at it. So the intention around being purposeful in meetings is really something that requires quite a bit of thought on the front end. And I do feel as though we're getting better at it. I think we're on a good path. Are we always good at it? No. But I do use Tamara as a facilitator or facilitators when I need to be an equal participant in the meeting.
Yeah.
So when I need multiple voices to be heard, when we're looking to strategize, when we're looking to creatively solve for something, when we're looking to really manage change with a large group, I really do turn to facilitated sessions so that regardless of level or experience, tenure, the voices around the table are all equal. And that ultimately is what drives better outcomes. So having the experience of a facilitated session then allows you to be really mindful of the outcomes that you want when you set a meeting agenda. And when we go back to that sense of time, how much of it do you need to achieve, again, in a short period of time or a long period of time, depending again on what that purpose of your meeting is. So I do sort of start again with Tamara's comment there, just around again that purpose.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of really well-intended leaders who do want to be inclusive, but don't necessarily have the techniques, right, to do that. So I hear from people. I've had some coaching conversations recently where they've said, well, I want I want to include and engage people in this conversation, or in this where they're developing a new kind of culture within their organization. We want to include people. We want to hear their ideas, but they just sit there like this, or they don't open their mouths, or they don't say anything. And I get frustrated because I put it out there. I say, what are your ideas, and what do you think? And then they don't say anything. And I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get them to talk. And so I think this is where there's like just a little upskilling can be really helpful for a leader who has the best of intentions and wants to be inclusive. It's just even just learning like a small toolkit of techniques to help to get people to talk and engage in a way that feels meaningful for them. And there's a lot that can be done. But I got to tell you, people are exhausted too. Like leaders and team members alike are just burnt out. So they're running from meeting to meeting, or clicking from meeting to meeting, and they don't have time to pause and think, oh, what's the structure of my meeting going to be, and how am I going to be, have a technique. They're just like diving in, taking a deep breath, going for it, having the next conversation, running to the next one. They're really burnt out. And I think that the just the swamp, and I guess, or waterfall of meetings that everybody is experiencing now is quite tiring for people, and
Why
they
is
don't.
that? Where do you think that's coming from?
Well, I
That
think Claire can jump in about the pandemic now.
Yeah, I think there is probably a number of things that lead to the number of meetings. One is technology enables us to be able to do it. Whereas probably before, in order to be able to get someone into a meeting, it would take a bit of coordination and logistics. So one, it's just easier to set a meeting up. Technology through Teams, Zoom, and whatever software you use, it's just easy to schedule it. You don't need to go check everybody's schedule. You can actually see what people's availability is online. And we don't make allowances for, where location is no longer a barrier. So I think one is technology has just allowed us to become it, to do it fairly easily. So I think that's one thing. I think this other thing too is, I think naturally we really do like brainstorming, connecting with people, building relationships. Those are all some things that happen when you meet with someone, whether it's one-on-one or otherwise. It's amazing the connections that you can make just by having a conversation. And sometimes it's the pre-meeting or in the post-meeting, when you really start to get to know people and their colleagues. So I think there's that piece too. And I think in some respects, I wouldn't say that all meetings aren't worth it. I mean, there's so many times when we get together and something comes out of a meeting that you didn't even intend. Sometimes you're able to solve for something really quickly, just with a meeting rather than, 20 emails going back and forth. So I think it's just the desire to get off screen in a way of this email exchange or document exchange, to actually being able to have a discussion. And I think that ultimately underlies, that ability for us to be able to connect or want to connect with someone. And just before I'll complete that thought, and then also know that in larger organizations and even in small ones, some of the things that we actually think about in meetings is it is a form of public speaking. And you think about people that have social anxieties around speaking in front of others. You think about people that are neurodiverse and require different environmental considerations before they can actually join in a meeting. I think about people who, have a hard time speaking in front of a particular gender or otherwise. And so I do think about those things as well when we think about inclusiveness post pandemic and thinking about some of the things that we've become more mindful of. So anyway, those are my two thoughts on that.
Claire, my sense from what you said there is not that it's contradictory of Tamara's point, but it's a reverse side of Tamara's point. So on the one hand, is there an avalanche of meetings? On the other hand, is there an opportunity in that avalanche for, for people connection, for personal interactions, the pre-meeting get-togethers that you mentioned, Claire, the post-meeting, and it might only be 30 seconds. It might be just asking, how's your partner, or how's the new baby, or how's the dog that you bought out? But this idea of meetings are essential to us as humans, because we're social animals. Therefore, we crave that getting together, and that applies in our organizations. But at the same time, particularly coming out of the pandemic, as both of you have alluded to, we have this technologically enabled capacity to have a meeting in an instant. And we can have people from 4 different parts of the globe, as we are on this meeting. Yes. And we can do that literally with a half an hour's notice, because we can see where everybody is. We can plug into their calendar. So have we got a contradiction going on here? Instant access, potential overload. Huge benefits, potential downsides.
Well, I guess it's a matter of balance, right? Like I live in Vancouver, so Canada, as I'm sure people who are listening know, is massive. We have multiple time zones. Claire and I are 3 hours apart in terms of our time zone. We're 5,000 kilometers apart, but we work together all the time, both in person and virtually. And the virtual, of course, has allowed. Now, I should preface this by saying the virtual existed before the pandemic, and there were actually lots of virtual facilitators doing virtual work before, and we also a lot of us had Zoom. It's just that now it is more prolific and more people are kind of on it. It's allowed me to do global projects. Claire was global head in an organization for quite some time, and we worked on stuff together, and it definitely can facilitate those kinds of gatherings, and it can be very, very effective. But again, it's like purpose before process. That's the process that you're choosing, but what is the purpose of it? And then what techniques do you actually use? I had a client who's a global sales team. They had normally, before the pandemic, they had met and they had these big sales kind of gatherings and conferences somewhere in the world, usually in like the Bahamas, or, their sales, right? So they would do the thing, and it was 4 days long. So when they called me and they said, okay, so usually we do this in person. We can't do it in person. So we'd like to organize a 4-day virtual event. And I said, no. No, you're not going to do that. And I said, at the most, what we're going to do is like maybe 2 to 3 half day, kind of 3 hour, like maximum. You can't, like, you just have to control like, if you're going to choose that as your kind of vehicle, then you have to think about how are we going to manage the design for energy and participation. And if that's what you need to do in order to get the job done, and that's what works for, the budget, people can't travel, then that's fine. Then do that, but do it well, right? There's ways of doing it well, just like an in-person meeting as well. You want to design it so that it can be really effective and that you're using the right processes. I have a client right now who said, well, I want to get everybody together, and I just want their big ideas. And I'm like, for what? Right? What are they for? Well, just the future. It's like, okay, we have to think this through, be thoughtful, think about what's the input, what's the output, and what is the process you're going to use to actually get, what does an idea actually look like? So it's a little bit of upskilling for some of the leaders, even if they're just having small meetings. Get a few techniques, get a few questioning techniques. I would say questioning techniques and frameworks can be one of the most invaluable things that you can ever learn, either for coaching your team or for leading your team and engaging them. And it doesn't require anything physical. You just have to have some really good questions. And, also having little frameworks, even for the smallest meeting. There's a lovely kind of method framework that goes what, so what now? Right. So no matter what you're doing, even if you're just having a one-on-one with your with a colleague, you can think, just answer the question, what is it we're talking about, or where are we going, or what are our goals? So what does this mean? What are the implications and consequences for us? What are our priorities? And then so what do we do now? How do we move this into action? So just having some of these little things can transform all kinds of meetings, workshops, engagements, conversations.
Claire, final comment to you before we do a summary wrap up?
I think
No, go ahead.
Sorry, Claire, just to remind our viewers that we are Talk to Your Meeting Doctors. We are here joined by Claire Santamaria, a seasoned executive with expertise in leading high-performance teams, and Tamara Eberle, a strategic facilitator specializing in collaboration and creative problem solving. We are now approaching the end of our show. Over to you, Claire. Sorry, I think I interrupted you, or Martin.
No.
Claire, go ahead.
Not at all. I think, I really do, again, drive back to some of those earlier points that we made around purpose and that consideration, and your thought, Paul, around what if you were hosting your meeting and thinking about and drawing those parallels between a meeting and a wedding, or hosting a wedding. And I do think that there are some thoughtful points there, as we've uncovered, that really do drive, again, that setup and that necessity for purpose, and again, the thinking of the needs of those that are attending as well. So thank you for starting us off that way. I thought that was a fantastic way to start our conversation.
We normally, as we wrap up, guys, I normally try to do a kind of a 1 minute or a minute and a half summary. Claire, you very eloquently started that summary brilliantly, because it took us back to the wedding analogy that Paul provocatively threw in. That pushed us into three things: the invitees, the seating that we might consider, and who we might ask to attend. That brought us down into talking about the purpose, because the meeting purpose dictates who ought to be there. We talked about the possibility, depending on size and scale, of getting everybody's voice heard. Tamara, that brought us into the idea of designing the meeting depending on that purpose, depending on the numbers, and then we can do the math. We can basically say, divide the time by the number of people, we get listening time and we get talking time. And then we can figure out how we got the right people for the right purpose, for the right amount of time in the right setting. The whole meeting design concept, we also then got into talking about meetings in person. We started to talk about meetings online and the enabling capacity that technology has had to create a kind of an explosion of meetings. But I think we kind of concluded that's not necessarily a bad thing, because Claire, you brought us down the road of saying we are human, we benefit from meeting, we have pre-meeting and post-meeting personal connections that can be hugely beneficial and hugely valuable. And then, Tamara, you took us into there might be benefit in executives having a small little toolkit of their own. Key questions, key tools, key techniques for managing time, space, purpose, people, venues, in order to maximize the benefits that they're able to extract out of their meetings. We've had a fascinating conversation, guys. We flew through 45 to 50 minutes, believe it or not. And I think we've only just scratched the surface. But really, thank you both for a really interesting and a really thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Martin, for your usual summary. I call them the golden nuggets. Thank you so much, our guest speakers, for joining us in this interesting fireside chat conversation this afternoon or in the morning, depending on when you are watching us. As we are truly now a global event today. And thank you so much, dear viewers, for watching and live. And also, if you're watching the replay, thank you so much. And leave your comments here on the LinkedIn page. And hope that you can keep following us for upcoming events.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you both. Thank you. Thanks, Tamara.